Hello, mate. How you doing?
Hello, Paul. How good? I'm really good. Yeah, how are you, mate?
Good, very good. Thank you. Very good.
Yeah, yeah.
So thank you for doing this. So we're going to have a look at your. You're going to talk us through all of the kind of magic, creative stuff you've done.
Yes, yeah. And it's quite interesting mixing something that is perfectly well recorded, but not with the same quality of microphones I'm used to.
Yes, even smaller than a lav mic.
Yeah. I mean, in fact, Lav mic probably would have been better, but shall I just tell you some of the things I've learned? I mean, it was quite an interesting learning experience.
Fire away. What's the process then? Where did you start?
The process was to take. You can see from my screen. I'm utilising the excellent new Pro Tools 20.3 folder feature, which is, my God, is actually really cool. So that was quite fun. It was quite nice. It was a perfect time. It was the first thing I did with it, so that's quite nice. And I'm using routing folders and things like that for those who are interested. But it was great because I could then have each section in its own little folder, which was great. So it looked nice. And I've just scrolled through here the screen. You can see it's all got nice colours and means I could automate each section, which is really nice.
Right.
So basically, I took what you did and made it into kind of the latest version of Pro Tools. Because the piece wasn't a steady click, I think each of them wanted to have their own flair to it, which is fantastic because it was it made it look great and sound great.
Yeah.
But the trouble is that then meant that timing wise they were a little bit off because there's a few tricky little kind of triplet things and semi-quavers and there's one particular run in the first violins that goes really high, then there's a big jump that they all, as you'd expect, interpret differently. If they were playing together with a leader or obviously with a conductor. To be honest with you, it was mainly that kind of difficult section from bars 17 through kind of 25 was the bit that I timed. If I go in closer on the first violins, for example, you can see that there's a few cuts in there.
It's like conforming them, isn't it? It's kind of like when you do backing vocals and you want to just make sure all the consonants are lined up and things like that.
Exactly. I didn't want to chop every single note. So if you look at them, I mean, like, for example, look at the cello for a different example. You can see that I've made a few chops, but not hundreds. Just chop those violins and just listen to the violins by itself. And suddenly it sounds like a real section, which is great. And so I spent a lot of time making sure that each section was sounding like a section. So that was that. And then I joined the first and seconds together to make sure that it sounded good, like together.
It's nice. It's still got a kind of internal rhythm to it and a kind of feel of.
That's the thing about an orchestra. There's always a slight thing, and that makes it. And that adds to the real kind of beauty of it. Things like the brass, I had to tighten up probably a little bit more. At a couple of occasions, like where the fanfares were, because they just didn't. They didn't quite work as well, being loose, obviously, as you'd expect, really. So that sounds really nice. It's a tight, like it's not. I've not gone ridiculous, but it is a nice.
Not on the grid.
No, it's not on the grid, but it's together. And so then, because that was the thing, if I made it too gritty, then it would also then make it sound too not orchestral. So I put them together, the kind of low brass as well. So that was one half of it was the timing, but then the kind of more complicated part was then making each individual instrument sound nice. Trouble is, there's a few flaws with phone microphones. Is that obviously they're not really designed for this purpose.
Yeah.
But obviously it's a low quality sample rate, which is okay. You can get away with that. But when you add them together, there's the artifacts, and it's it becomes more difficult on the ear. But also they all different levels, and they also the different varying manufacturers have. I don't quite understand, but obviously they have to have some sort of like limiting and compression algorithms and auto. We can't set our gain level on our phone cameras, so they have an auto gain system. So what happens, and perhaps, is when some of the musicians made a loud noise at the beginning, then their gain was great. But when if they did a little kind of only flick or something, then their gain was quite quiet, and then when they started playing, it would do like this kind of weird auto level thing.
Yes.
And so halfway through a note, particularly that you can hear it in some of the woodwinds, I think, is like you hear at the start of the note is soft and it'll ramp up, or the opposite way around. It's loud and then ramps down very, very quickly, like within, I don't know, 10 milliseconds or something like that. I mean, I didn't go into it scientifically, but and so you've got these weird things where it does that and it kind of sounds like a weird flutter, so it just adds to the overall kind of difficulty. And then when they get loud, then it compresses even more, so that's one thing. And then also you've got the different rooms. You know, some people were in quite a reverberant room, and some people were quite a dry room. You know, actually, and some of them are mono and some of them are stereo as well. That's the kind of weird thing about.
Yeah, I noticed that.
It's so weird, isn't it? But it's like, but the stereo ones sound really nice. They sound kind of nicer because it's they're taking it the room and stuff. But then they're more difficult to mix because they're more ambient. So it was. So I basically went to each one and just made it sound, my kind of usual mix thing, make in each individual element sound as good as it can do. And then I spent a lot of time playing around with reverbs and putting them into a space. So I used sometimes just like a kind of an altiverb on like a low mix and like a studio to get like a kind of space around some of them. Not everything. The strings didn't work with that, so I ended up bypassing that. You can see on my screen. I kept it for the basses, but I felt the woodwinds needed it. Let me play it and you can see what I mean. Let's listen to these flutes here. Let's find a nice, more melodic bit. So that's it with the space, but this is without it. It's subtle. It's subtle, but I felt that just helped, just give it a bit more kind of distance. I guess that's the reason it pushed it a bit further back into the mix where you'd expect them to be, because obviously there's no tree or there's no room, so it was to kind of get that kind of feeling of being a little bit further behind the strings. You can see from my folders, this is why my folders work really well, because you can see it very nicely. I've got my little mixer here, which you might just be able to see underneath my fingers, but I've got an 8-channel mixer that I could then ride each individual section, which was great to kind of balance it. And then I ended up doing like an overall mix pass. You can see here it's got this all track at the top, to kind of shape your dynamics a tiny bit more, because like I said, when it gets loud and you've got all those things, I was having to use a little bit of compression to make each section not too dynamic or too sticky outy. So it wasn't to avoid compressing it, because I tried not to over compress it, but it was just the compression of the recording device.
Right, so you have to expand that again.
Yeah, exactly, to expand that again. So that required a bit of that. And that was, like you said a couple of times, can we make that? And I think that was probably one of the bigger moments, was when it started to feel more like an orchestra, when we gave it that kind of, as you can see here, there's a kind of, it goes from, towards the end, it goes from like plus 2.5 and it goes down to minus 7.5. So I'm doing 10 dB of riding on it to give it that kind of sense of an orchestral performance. And that's the way the phones record, I'm very pleased with how it sounds, but there's still definitely, it's not as good as a studio recording. I'm very pleased with it. I mean, and you can see, like, you can look at the different dynamics of I had to have, like, some of these tracks are at minus like 4.6 and some are at like minus 12, and I had to go through and just minus 6, minus 14.5, minus 13.8 for the different performances. And I had to go through and just click gain or each thing to make it sound
relative.
Yeah, relatively. So there was lots and lots of tweaking.
What about the kind of timbre of the instruments? I mean, which ones lent themselves to it and which ones were the most drastically out?
It's very difficult. I mean, I think none of them really lent themselves to it in a traditional recording. In a recording thing. I mean, I think I found getting good sounds on the strings a little bit easier, actually, than, because the louder instruments were definitely harder. Like, the brass, percussion, because they're so used to hearing those in a big space, that was hard. Some of the woodwinds sounded nice. I think some of the quieter instruments is probably a better way of saying it. The quieter instruments worked better than the louder ones.
Right.
Because of the way that the moment the phone hears it loud, it shuts it down. Yeah.
So with the brass then, how did you go about adding the kind of sizzle back into that?
I mean, let's look at the trumpets, for example. Let's have a look. Let's go into that. So it's a nice little thing. Let's have a look at let's look at what I did here. So we've got a bit of EQ on each one. So sometimes I had to like take the sizzle away, because that actually the phone gave it quite a lot. But then I added, you can see I've kind of counteracted it, but I needed to do each individual one to make it sound good, and then I put it back on the master after I put the compressor on it. So it's kind of counterintuitive, but it kind of worked. I think that maybe that might be the order in which I did it. So I did the individual ones, and then when I put it in the mix, I realised I needed to put the brightness back in again.
Yeah.
Often what happened was, because we got them in different orders, you'd kind of start one way and then have to kind of correct a different way. So that was the other thing. It's like I didn't want to go back to the beginning because I spent so much time. So that's why these things have got funny like reverse EQs on it. Let's have a look at the. I mean, they sound quite. It sounds.
Sounds great.
It's it's kind of like again. You'll probably see the same thing again. A lot of brassness added back in there, but that's individually. Again, oh no, different. I mean, slightly different frequencies. You can see again boosting a lot of one end in the brass. That was lost by the phones. And then. Percussion section, let's have a look. I mean, this one I gave a bigger space, again put an even bigger room on, as you can see that. I think the brass I didn't put the room on because I think it made it too far away. I think because of the compression of the microphone makes the room, like obviously it brings the whole room together. So they didn't kind of need it, the brass, but the percussion definitely did.
Right.
So I've got a much bigger stage on this, and you can definitely hear the difference there on that cymbal. Let me play it. It's much closer, and this is like sounds much more traditional. And then just different levels of reverb, and again a bit of brightness on those things. But again, like it's funny, isn't it, how these things? Looking at this, like the Timps, for example, again took a bit of stuff off, but it's it's that. Harp seemed to work all right, I think. I had to take a lot of top end off that, but then I guess to fit that in the mix, it's a funny thing. We wouldn't hear it without the EQ.
Right. Yeah.
It's kind of like just a bit too zingy in the mix.
I think I seem to recall reading somewhere that high frequencies drop off more quickly as you go further away. So the kind of profile of the sound changes. So that would make sense with what you just said in that the harp, for example, which obviously has a lot of high frequency content. If you record it that close, you're going to have to knock some of that off in order to get it to sit back. And
different people sat in different rooms and things like that as well. That was the other thing, like it might zingy around certain things. So I don't know enough about the technology behind it. I just kind of use my ears really, and just thought it'd be safer to kind of just, rather than try and second guess the the science behind it, I just go, right, okay, let's listen to it. And if I need to adjust it, I definitely did some much more, EQ and riding that I've ever done on this type of recording before. But then it's a completely unique kind of situation. So it's a lot of fun, and
I think it's interesting that there's been people with this kind of lockdown. People have started putting things together, and I think there's an app on that you can get on iOS. Can't remember what it's called now, but where you can record yourself and then overdub yourself and put a kind of grid of squares up. Quite a lot of the things that I've seen where people are performing together, they're recorded with proper mics.
Yeah.
So. I don't think anybody has yet attempted anything as foolish as this.
Well, I think it's not in this size anyway. I think there's some smaller ones. I've seen some other orchestral ones doing like a kind of sextet kind of thing. But no, exactly. If you look at the telly ones, they're done very well. Where they obviously, like I saw one on Graham Norton, I think the other day, where they've got individual instruments and they obviously just track it up and then mix it. It's mixed in the same way, but everyone's sent their track over. Even with this time delay between you and I talking on some iPads to each other is still too much for two musicians to play together.
Yeah. Well, I mean, just even sometimes playing, if you've got, I like to try and keep the round trip as small as possible in my sequencer when I'm recording stuff in. Even when you get up to kind of 512 is a struggle.
Oh, it's impossible. Yeah, it's impossible. You
can't. The feel is wrong. So I mean, and that's just with a super fast computer sat right in front of me. So it's doing this stuff remotely live is just impossible.
It's a nice experience for everybody. But let's get back in the studios, eh?
Well, fingers crossed.
Yeah, soon.
But absolutely fantastic. So what is the weirdest thing that you had to do in the whole mix.
Like overall dynamics was probably the weirdest thing I had to do, because that's so kind of not what I'd do in this type of mix, like.
Yeah.
And I've never had to do that much. You can see it on my screen here. This I'm just highlighting it now. This amount of riding of dynamics was certainly the biggest thing. And just kind of chasing the sound, really chasing. It's funny, isn't it? But how your ears work. But the first time I listened to it every time, it was a bit like, oh, it still doesn't sound quite good. But then 3 or 4 listens in, your ears have got used to that kind of sound, and it's like, oh, it sounds really good.
Yeah, no, I know. I think it's amazing. I mean, I think that what you've done is you've removed so many of the artifacts and so many of those. We know it's about what you know, what's familiar to your ear. Well, we all know what it sounds like when we talk on the phone. We kind of know what it sounds like when we hear music on the phone, because people play music to say, oh, listen to this.
Absolutely right. Yeah, absolutely right.
And when you've removed those things, suddenly you're in a kind of like a kind of world of possibility, I guess. And so then it's about your memory of what an orchestra sounds like in a proper session.
And I guess my memory for that is quite strong, because that's that's what I've been doing for the last 20 odd years. And I'm desperately trying to get it. My professional pride won't let me set it free, without it sounding so amazing. And I guess that's probably what I mean, really.
Well, it's amazing. I think you've done an incredible job, mate, and thank you very much.
My real pleasure. And I think it looks great with the video, really fantastic, and I hope that lots and lots of people see it. It's lovely. Well done, you too. A great edit.
It's been a lot of fun. The funniest thing is that they are, whenever you go into this kind of orchestra with people who have become who have achieved this level of performance, some of them are going to have some technical skills and some kind of and are going to be kind of tech savvy. But a lot of them, their life's work has been has been building their skill set on the instrument. Yeah. So trying to approach something like this where they're kind of, they're sort of, it's not only just the recording process as well, it's actually trying to get the files to me. And
well, they're very exposed, aren't they? That's the thing, they're very exposed. Yes. And I think that was the interesting thing when we were recording the BBC SO library, was like how integrated the sound was of each section, and I guess there's that familiarity of sitting where you sit, or in your chair, or like the person you're next to, or the person in front of you, and you watch and everything like that. And I think that's, I guess, removed again, which again as another layer of difficulty for them, in another sense, another layer of being exposed, or less comfort blanket, or however you want to say it. So I think it's kind of remarkable, and they were never going to be able to. There was always going to be editing involved, noises and that kind of stuff. There's a lot. I had to chop out all of the gaps when there was gap, because it's people's fridges or whatever.
And the ambient noise builds up.
It really builds up. So I was very keen to just keep that as clean as possible.
Well done, mate. It's absolutely incredible.
Fantastic. I am genuinely pleased with it, and it was a great experience, and you learn so much from this experience about how to use our technology, and how to and what you do get a little bit like blasé about listening to qualities and stuff like that, but then it's really interesting to go, because I'm just mixing some of the other things that are pre-recorded before lockdown, and it's like, wow. And when you come at the really when you get it in a nice space, it is like, wow, it really so much easier to mix. So
great. All right, well, thank you very much, mate. Thanks for talking us through that, and I'll stay safe. And I'll hopefully see you in real life at some point.
The good grief. Never.
All right, cheers, mate. Bye.